What's going on? It's Mitch here, live for your full in-depth analysis of the upcoming 2021 NFL free agency, breaking down the best free agents at every position. The top 10 at quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and so on. Offense, defense, I've got you covered. We're going to talk about the best players. We're going to talk about the undervalued players. And we are also going to discuss the buyer beware players. This is a full preview of free agency. More free agency discussion than you'll ever need here in this video on this episode of The Bottom Line. What's going on, guys? It's gonna be a great show. I'm excited. Get in that comment section. Let me know who your favorite free agents are this year, who you feel your team should be going after, which positions should your team be filling this free agency. This is going to be a wild free agency, quite possibly one we have never seen before. There are talks about a quarterback like Deshaun Watson of that magnitude and that significance being discussed as a potential trade target. You know, there's guys like Cam Newton at quarterback, former second overall picks like Mitch Trubisky on the market. There are guys like Aaron Jones who are Pro Bowl level running backs. At wide receiver, we're loaded. We got like 3 or 4 number one wide receivers. Defensively, Shaq Barrett is on the market. We just have so many guys that are going to be so crucial to the 2021 NFL season that we need to discuss, and they could be in new places. Their teams are going to try to retain them, but we'll see what happens. This free agency promises to be absolutely outstanding, and it's not just the free agents, but it's also lining up for the draft and then the trades that could go down along with it. But in this video specifically, I'm going to be taking a look at the top 10 at every position for the UFAs, so unrestricted free agents. I'm not talking about restricted free agents. I'm not talking about, guys that are more likely to end up back on their own team. I'm talking about the UFAs, the guys that will hit the open market. Even if they don't seem like they're going anywhere, they will be discussed in this video. So before I get into my full free agency discussion as well as off-season discussion for 2021, and I give you my initial preview of free agency, make sure that you do Gronk spike that like button and don't forget to subscribe to The Bottom Line View for more NFL free agency. This channel is going to have you covered when it comes to NFL free agency content, as well as the NFL draft and all of your off-season needs in the NFL. Subscribe to The Bottom Line View, guys. So this is your full free agency breakdown, but before I do get to the breakdown, before I do get to the rankings, I do have a couple things to say before we get into the meat of the show. So first, there is a Madden League going down. I posted a video. It's now unlisted because it's been about a week and it wasn't gaining any more traction. So I wanted to let you know here, right now, that there is a Madden Bottom Line View League. If you have not joined and you're interested in joining, it's on the PS4. We're going to fantasy draft this weekend, Saturday probably. Join the league, okay? If you want to join the league, get in the Discord, which you can find the link in the description, and at Turtle spelt with a D, okay? So Turdle. Don't ask me why he spells his name that way, but that's just how he spells his name. So at him, tell him you want to join and you can get in. We still have about 4 or 5 spots left if you're interested in playing Madden and trying to beat me, which isn't going to happen, but you could try your best. All right, so that is the first shout out I have. The second shout out I have is for the Patreon. So if you're interested in free agency specifically, you will want to check out the Patreon. The link for Patreon is also the link in the description. Okay, I'm going to have a couple videos coming up. First is going to be an even more in-depth look at the free agent class this year. So in this video, I'll be covering like the top 10 quarterbacks, the top 10 running backs, the top 10 wide receivers. But what if you are like crazy about football and you want to know about like the 23rd best receiver? Well, that is why you sign up to Patreon, because I'll be talking about the 22nd best receiver, the 13th best edge player. That is going to be for Patreon, the more in-depth stuff. I also put up my free agency ranking. So if your team signs somebody and you're like, oh, what does Mitch think? You don't necessarily need to tune in. You can maybe just look at my rankings and be like, oh, Mitch has him as the 14th best tight end. So that's who I got. So you could also get that on Patreon. And lastly, there's going to be a video that I'll likely do today or tomorrow, and it's going to be the lessons from 2020. I was going to put it on this show, but I felt like it was too big of a discussion to throw in a free agency. So the biggest lessons, the biggest things that we learned from 2020, roster construction wise, league wide, the way that football is trending, that is going to be a separate video that is on Patreon, that is exclusive to Patreon, that you will not find here on YouTube. So guys, do check out Patreon for more Bottom Line View content, exclusive content that you will not get here on the channel. So now that that's done, let's get into the show, and let's first start off with the top 5 teams that I'm looking towards, and I'm really pegging for a big offseason this year. So these are the 5 teams that I feel will have the biggest offseasons. Or another way to put that would be, I'm anticipating these teams to be very active, and I'm anticipating these teams to make some big moves for their team this year. And I also believe that they will make moves that will help them be relevant this year. So all that is taken into account in this top 5. So let's get to that top 5. The top 5 teams to watch out for this offseason. So my top 5 teams to watch out this offseason. Let's start off with number 5. That's the Cincinnati Bengals. So the Cincinnati Bengals are, of course, Joe Burrow, right? Joe Burrow, first overall pick, got injured last year for Cincinnati. But they do have some young talent. They do have some big-name free agents actually on the market, such as William Jackson, such as Carl Lawson. Those 2 players will have to be re-signed, or they'll have to look elsewhere in the draft or free agency to get those players replaced. I like Cincinnati as a team to watch for because I believe they're young. They have a quarterback that's very promising. They have some skill players that are very good. And I believe that if they gain some players on the offensive, defensive lines, and just overall build the body, the bread, the meat and potatoes of the roster, I believe that the Bengals will be significantly improved next season if they have a big free agency. So that's why they're at number 5. At number 4, the Indianapolis Colts. It feels like the Colts are always one of my more anticipated teams to watch in the offseason. And that is because they always have a lot of cap space, okay? So the reason they're number 4 and not higher is because it does appear that they have not been able to get a big-time quarterback. And I don't believe they will be able to get a big-time quarterback. You can't see it, but I'm in quotations here. The reason I say that is I think that takes them a little out of contention. Because if they didn't get Matthew Stafford, I don't really know what else is out there for them to possibly get. It's not going to be Deshaun Watson, obviously. It could be Carson Wentz. Maybe they can make that work. It could be Sam Darnold. Maybe they could be competitive with those guys, but I don't see them as contenders. Then you look elsewhere. They have a lot of money, but they don't have a lot of holes. I think wide receiver could be a place that they invest in. But eventually they need to start making moves to get this team from playoff team to contender, because they've been in playoff mode or near playoff land for a long time, but they've never taken that jump forward. At number 3, I have Carolina. I almost put them at number 2. The reason I put them at number 3 is because I feel like Deshaun Watson very well could end up on Carolina. That move in itself would shock the absolute core of the NFL, and I believe that Carolina is all in. I say this because of how aggressively they pursued Matthew Stafford. If they pursued Matthew Stafford that aggressively, I buy into how aggressively they may pursue Deshaun Watson. Secondly, they have some holes on their roster. They're very young in a lot of places, but they could improve in a lot of places. They can improve on the offensive line. They could improve at tight end. They can improve on the defensive line. They could improve at linebacker, safety, corner. So they have a lot of spots that they can improve outside of simply quarterback. At number 2, the Miami Dolphins. Miami is a team that nearly made the playoffs last year, kind of unexpectedly from my perspective. And I believe they have not a lot of holes defensively, but I'm looking for them to add a lot of big names, potentially in a lot of high key spots. So maybe a pass rusher, maybe a big time wide receiver, maybe a tight end, maybe a running back. Miami could add a lot of positions that will have a lot of people saying, ooh, look out for Miami, because they're going to have a fantasy offseason kind of thing. That's what I expect. I also wouldn't be shocked if they made a move in the quarterback market. So Miami is number 2. At number 1, it's New England. The reason why New England is number 1, guys, is because New England has a lot of pressure right now, right? Bill Belichick has so much pressure to make something happen right now. And that's why I believe they are number 1, the team to look out for this offseason. Because they need a lot of things, okay? They need a quarterback, obviously. But they need a wide receiver. They need a tight end. All of these are high-profile positions. They also need a lot of defense, okay? They need edge players. They need defensive linemen. So they need maybe a linebacker. So New England's a high-profile team, not just because they're my favorite team, but they're a high-profile team with a lot of media coverage. Of course, Tom Brady just won the Super Bowl. A lot of pressure. Bill Belichick backs against the wall. Everyone calling him the worst GM in the league. So all of that is taken into account with, as well as the reports are saying the Patriots are all in on this offseason. They have a lot of salary cap, which is very unique. They never have that. So that is why they're the number 1 team to watch this offseason, guys. If you haven't already, make sure you do. Gronk, spike that like button, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more NFL. Okay, so that is my list of the top 5 teams to watch out for in free agency. Now let's shift to the actual free agency breakdown. And this is going to be my breakdown, okay? So the way I look at it here is we're going to have every position from quarterback all the way till nickel. I didn't include kicker, okay? I didn't include fullback, although I might throw in a couple names at fullback. But I'm going to give you my top 10 players. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on each position, and I'm going to move that way, right? If you want a more in-depth look, guys, remember that you can get it on Patreon. But I'm going to give you a pretty in-depth look at every position, as well as guys that I like a lot that stand out to me on each graphic that you see. There's also going to be discussion regarding 3 undervalued players at each position that I think may be a little underrated, that could go for less money and could be very valuable. And then 2 players that I think are buyer beware. So players that stand out as, ooh, they're questionable. I'm not sure about them. That could be a bad investment. So 3 undervalued, 2 buyer beware, and top 10 at every position. Okay, but before we do that, let's just take a look at the salary cap so everybody understands what every team's looking at going into this free agency. So here's just the overall, this is, I believe, Sport Track. So you could check this out. Basically, just search up NFL salary cap or cap space, and you'll find something like this. So I just wanted to show you this first off, just to understand, okay, who are the teams that are going to be really looking to spend some money? So obviously, you have Jacksonville, who has a lot of money here. They're going to get the number 1 or they got the number 1 pick, and they're going to get a quarterback there, right? So then they don't need to go after a quarterback, but they can go after a lot of other things. Maybe a big receiver, right? That quarterback, Trevor Lawrence, could really, really entice a wide receiver, especially a young receiver, to go there. It's going to give them buying power defensively, offensively. Indianapolis is a team that just made the playoffs. They have a lot of money to spend. The Jets have a long way to go, a lot of needs to fill, but they have a lot of money. The Patriots, I just brought them up, a lot of money. Washington just made the playoffs. They need a quarterback, a lot of money. Bengals, Broncos, Dolphins, Chargers. Browns are an interesting one. Chargers are an interesting one. We talked about the Dolphins, the Bengals. We talked about, okay, there's Dallas. The Bucs are really interesting because they just won the Super Bowl. They arguably have the best roster in the league. They have some key players to sign, and they still have $20 million in cap space, which they could also maneuver to get even more. So the Bucs could entice some of these veteran players that may be ring chasing to go there. So those are the teams to look out for in terms of cap space. Now let's get to the first position, which of course, guys, is the quarterback position. And we have our boy Cam Newton. He is one of them. So free agency quarterbacks, My top 10. Let's start off with that at the quarterback position. So, actually, let's pause for a second. So, the quarterback position in this year's free agency has a big name in it, Dak Prescott, that I don't feel enough people are talking about in terms of maybe he does actually leave Dallas. Everyone's talking about Deshaun Watson, but what happens if Dak leaves Dallas? Because another team could pry him away from Dallas that has the money, that has the assets. Could happen. There are also a lot of veteran players in the middle that could be borderline starting caliber and also players that could be bridge quarterbacks. So let's take a look at the top 10 at the position. So these are my top 10 free agents at quarterback. You have Dak Prescott, who is by far the best UFA quarterback available. He is, in my opinion, an elite quarterback, as in top 10 in this league. When supported by good players on offense, he can win the MVP. That's how talented Dak Prescott is, just as he has in Dallas. You have a team that in Dallas needs to keep him or else they're really in a pickle. At number 2, I have Cam. The reason I have Cam at number 2, I think some people would put him lower. That is fair. Understand this. Cam was in just about the worst offense you could have possibly been in for Cam Newton. Okay, they tried to make it work, but he simply had no weapons around him in New England last year. He also showed very high levels of play. He had a few games last year that were borderline top 5 performance caliber level of play, right? You had the Seattle game, you had the Texans game, you had the Jets game. You had some games last year with Cam that really stood out as, ooh, that could be old MVP Cam Newton. So maybe a year removed, another year of an injury, being healthy, coming into this season, maybe that means Cam is a little bit better physically than he was a year ago. He is very well respected by players. He is a fantastic leader, stands out from that perspective on this list. And he's, of course, experienced. He's also very unique in comparison to Mitchell Trubisky, Jameis Winston, and Ryan Fitzpatrick. He gives you something that all these other guys do not give you. So outside of Prescott, I believe Cam is by far the best option here for this year. Jameis Winston's number 3. Jameis Winston, I think, has a very high potential given his talent. Winston is really, really talented, but I think it's going to take a very good coach to hone his skills in, and I believe that could be Sean Payton. I do believe that could be Sean Payton. When you think about it, Jameis, he got the eye surgery, everything, so that should help with his overall decision-making. I would think being a quarterback, you need to be able to see the field. I believe he's going to go back to New Orleans. I don't really see him going elsewhere. I think he's bought in. Even Drew Brees said it's your team now. I'm believing that, so I like Jameis. I think he could have a pretty good year this year, maybe surprise some people. And I at least hope so, because I do see the talent. I just hope that the brain follows suit. Number 4, I have Trubisky. So Mitchell Trubisky is a guy that has shown some promise at times. He's also shown very poor play at other times. I think you saw the limitations of a team with Mitchell Trubisky last year. I think the offense has to be super vanilla because he doesn't process things well. I don't think he's the smartest guy. I think he's a very good athlete. He even has a pretty good arm. Better than pretty good. He can run, he can scramble. I think if you can bring the best out of him, similarly to the way Nagy did 2 years ago, then you can get a guy that can work, can win some games, and with a good supporting cast, you can get to the playoffs with. I think Trubisky, with maybe a different scheme, a different coach, a different perspective, and just a fresh start, because he was never really given a chance from the start due to the fact that, you didn't draft Mahomes, you didn't draft Watson, and all the pressure was on Trubisky, and nobody really liked him in Chicago. So I think if he goes elsewhere, he's still young, he still has time to improve, so it's worth the risk, it's worth the investment, in my opinion, because he is an athletic kid, and he seems to be a good guy that's willing to learn. At number 5, I have Jacoby Brissett. Reason I have Jacoby Brissett at number 5 is because he is, or I believe I have Jacoby and Ryan Fitzpatrick at number 5 and 6. They're kind of swapped. Let's take back a look at this quarterback ranking. So I did put Fitzpatrick at 5. So I put Fitzpatrick at 5 because I think if you need to win right now or you're looking for a bridge quarterback, I think he's a better asset for just this year. But I think moving forward, that's why I said number 5, Jacoby. I think you could swap him either way. But Jacoby is a guy that, great teammate, great locker room guy, great personality, excellent backup, I think. He's a career backup to me, I think. Maybe he could play and win some few games as a starter, but I don't really see that as a long-term investment, a long-term option for you. But he can bring you some things. He has a strong arm. He's pretty athletic. He can run quarterback sneaks, a little run game here and there, as he does in Indianapolis. So he could be a good backup, a very high-tier backup for probably the next, 10 years possibly for a team. I very well could see that with Jacoby Brissett. At number 7, Andy Dalton. Andy Dalton is, I just don't think, I think his days are behind, they're in the past. Andy Dalton was once a good quarterback, once a high-tier system quarterback type of guy. He'd win games in the league, but not very impressive physically. Still has a decent arm, still pretty accurate, but he is a pocket quarterback who is not exactly, Tom Brady, let's just say. Andy Dalton's a guy that you could probably win a few games here and there with if you're in a tough spot. But unless the team is unreal around him, you're not really going to go anywhere with him. So Andy Dalton, I would see a better answer if you're looking for a bridge quarterback. I'd prefer guys like Cam. I'd prefer guys like maybe Winston, but I feel that's more long-term. Trubisky, I think, is a better bridge option because he has more potential. Fitzpatrick has shown better recently, and Jacoby has more potential as well as youth that he could be your backup into the future. So that's why Dalton's only at 7, although he had a couple good games with Dallas last year, but he kind of showed you that he has great receivers in Dallas, and he still was just kind of average. Tyrod Taylor, I think, has gotten all the opportunity in the world to succeed, and he hasn't really been able to do it as of late. He is basically a high-tier backup, high-class backup with experience. He can come in a few games a year and win. Number 9, Joe Flacco. I was actually kind of interested in and kind of, when I saw his name on the free agency list, I was like, Joe Flacco actually played kind of well at times last year. I know that's kind of shocking because I thought he was done, like before he was signed by the Jets, but he came back with the Jets last year and actually played pretty well in spots, in moments with like the worst team in the league. So Joe Flacco, I think, is a decent backup because he's Joe Flacco. I mean, he's won a Super Bowl. He's won a lot of playoff games. He's been in big spots, big moments. He's, of course, experienced. He's smart, all that stuff. So he's going to help a quarterback get better, a young guy. So I like Joe Flacco as a backup. I think that would be a very good investment from a team, especially if you have a pocket quarterback specifically. And lastly, at number 10, Blaine Gabbert. I put Blaine Gabbert at number 10 because I think he has physical tools to be, a borderline, like a few games a year. If your starter gets hurt, I think you can win a couple games because I think Blaine Gabbert has physical tools. Also, Bruce Arians has talked very highly about him as a quarterback, and that's always a good thing. And he's just been learning from Tom Brady. So I think that Blaine Gabbert has been a guy that's always had, the mobility, he's had the arm, but I think he's a guy that has been a backup so long because he's been getting smarter on the way to play football, the way to play in the NFL. And I could see Blaine Gabbert actually having a little bit of a resurgence as like a bridge guy, maybe for like a year or like half a year. I could see that. So that's why I have him at number 10. All the other guys, we'll discuss that on Patreon, but there's not really anyone else to note there. So there's like RG3, there's some other guys, but like nobody really interesting that are worth anything. So actually a list of 10 was pretty good. And it's really like a list of, I would say, 8 overall that are like guys that maybe could have a starting role at this point this season. So that is the quarterback rankings, the top 10. Let's get to the undervalued and the buyer beware quarterbacks. So these guys are going to overlap. These lists are going to overlap. So the quarterbacks that are undervalued, in my opinion, or will be undervalued. So the way to look at this is these guys will be undervalued by teams, I feel, and I think will be undervalued by fans this offseason. So Cam Newton, of course, we talked about him because his situation was worse than a lot of people think. And I think now, I think Cam can be a guy that this next year, if you give him a couple of good weapons on offense and a good defense, you could get to the playoffs. Like, I think Cam still has that potential. He went 7-8 as a starter on New England with a terrible roster. So I do think Cam overall is being a little slept on. Jacoby Brissett. Jacoby is a guy that, like I just talked about, he is going to be a young career backup that can start if need be. So to me, that's undervalued because you need quarterbacks that can win you a couple games every year if your starter gets hurt. Ryan Fitzpatrick, just typically undervalued overall. He's been very good the last 2 years when he's played. He was better than Tua last year and got benched for no reason. I think teams are going to look at that and say, Fitz got benched for no reason, and look at that as a negative instead of a positive where Fitzpatrick could actually still win games in this league. Buyer beware, I'd look at Mitch Trubisky. The reason I say Mitch Trubisky is because I think there's going to be a couple teams out there that say, oh, he was the second overall pick, and maybe he could be our starter. I wouldn't look at Trubisky that way. So that's why I say buyer beware. I'd look at him as maybe a project, like a cheap contract. But if you're having to pay him a significant amount to be your backup, it's probably a bad investment. And then Andy Dalton, because of the situation in Dallas that I thought was pretty good, I thought he underwhelmed. I thought the expectation for him was much higher, and he underwhelmed expectations. So those are the 3 undervalued and the 2 buyer beware players. Now, guys, let's move to the running back position, which is a position that always has like so many good free agents that are worth signing and worth investing in. And it's always a tough place with the running back position where you have a position you could get in the draft, like the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th round. You're finding absolute gem at running back, like gem after gem after gem. There's drafts where you have like 8 starters in 1 year. So running back is hard to invest in free agency because you're overall paying more money for a veteran at a position that is a youth position. Unless they're a role player or a true upper echelon stud, it's hard to pay for a running back in this league right now. So let's take a look at the top 10 guys that I see this year in free agency. So some things that I took into account more for running back than any other position. The number one thing was injuries. So if you were just injured or hurt, that significantly hurt your chance at being ranked high because you can't be hurt at running back. Your career could be over if you get 1 or 2 significant injuries because it's a position about toughness, about balance, about speed, about athleticism. And you can't have that at running back. And then the other thing was versatility. So that was the second thing, versatility. What can you do for me? Can you run? Can you block? Can you catch? And can you play in multiple schemes? So those were the 2 things I took into account for specifically role type running backs, which I think a lot of these guys are. So let's look. At number 1, I have Aaron Jones. I think Aaron Jones is the true standout on this list. He is the best player by far, in my opinion. He can catch the ball very well. He's explosive as a runner. I think he's in his prime right now. And I believe that he will probably go to a new team. I don't really see Green Bay re-signing him. So Aaron Jones is at number 1. Number 2, Chris Carson. Chris Carson is, when he's healthy, an excellent number 1 running back. But the question is he healthy? I mean, he's never healthy. That's the problem. But I love Chris Carson's style. He's physical. I think he would be excellent in a place like, hey, let's just throw it out there, Buffalo. Right? Buffalo it's cold, it's windy, and when you have a guy like Chris Carson who's running downhill, it's just tough to tackle that guy. I feel like Chris Carson, if he doesn't go back to Seattle, I would look out for a possible contender snatching him up on maybe a cheaper contract because he does have an injury history, although he's not that old. Number 3, Leonard Fournette. This is a guy that could be a smash investment, could be an absolute disaster. Like, we saw both sides of Leonard Fournette this year where he was one of the worst running backs in the league and one of the best running backs in the league. So it just depends on what Leonard Fournette you're getting, but he's still young enough to make an investment as a starter or as a committee guy. Kenyon Drake he had a great year last year, but this past year he was underwhelming from an explosive standpoint. He does offer equal value as a runner and receiver, so that's positive. But I don't feel Drake is going to be valued very highly because I just don't see him being that good anymore. I just don't see the explosiveness on tape. Mike Davis, number 5, I think he is very underrated. We saw it last year. He filled in for CMC and was absolutely awesome in the time that Christian McCaffrey was hurt. I could see him going back to Carolina and being their true starter if Christian McCaffrey does leave and get traded. I could see that. Then we have at number 6, I have Jamal Williams. Jamal Williams, I think, is a really good RBBC guy, running back by committee guy, where he could catch the ball. He's a good power back. He's kind of an interesting mold of power and receiving, which is rare. Number 7, I have Marlon Mack. Marlon Mack can be a starter, but he doesn't really catch the ball. He's more of like a LeGarrette Blount kind of guy where he's a different style of player, but he's like a first and second down guy. You need like a pass catcher to go along with him, but he's coming off a significant injury. I'd rank him at number 5 if he wasn't coming off an Achilles injury, but he is. Number 8, I have James White because I think James White is arguably the best third down running back in the NFL. And when you have that player, even though he's not a true running back, he's more of a receiver. And I also feel he's kind of limited in the teams he can go to. I think he's going to go to Tampa, New England, pretty much nobody else. So that's why James White isn't a little higher, because I think what he offers a team is actually undervalued. Number 9, James Conner. I don't like James Conner that much as a player, human being, excellent. I think, as a second running back, I think he'd be solid, but I just don't see the explosiveness. I don't see the big playmaking ability. He can do a little bit of everything, which is nice, but I just don't see true number 1 running back from James Conner. Number 10, Matt Breida. I like Matt Breida, always have. The big problem with him is injuries. Has a significant injury history in terms of he's always banged up. It's not really like he's missed a lot of games, but it's like hamstring here, ankle here, groin there, and it's just like, you never get 100% of Matt Breida. But he could catch the ball, and when he gets it and he's in open field, he's gone. So those are 2 things I value. So those are my top 10 running backs in free agency that I look out for to get signed by some teams. I think all offer a little bit different. That's the nice thing about the running back position. So here are my undervalued and buyer beware guys. So my undervalued, you'll see some guys that aren't in the top 10 here. So first, Rex Burkhead. I thought Rex Burkhead was the best running back on New England when he was healthy. He is I think this is where he's going to fall in. I think he's an excellent receiver, and he doesn't really get to be that in New England because James White. So I think Rex Burkhead is going to end up, I don't know if he'll come back to New England or not, but wherever he goes, I think he'll fill in as like a third down back. I don't think he's going to be looked at as a lead guy. Definitely not. He's coming off of ACL, and I think he's just a really good 4-down player. Like, he could play special teams. He can return kicks. He could do a lot of things. And I just was really impressed with Rex Burkhead this year and the last couple of years, honestly. Jerick McKinnon, I think McKinnon could be undervalued, and this is why. He just came back from significant injuries, like missed 2 seasons and came back. And I think people are going to look at McKinnon as, maybe he's not really had it anymore. He played with Shanahan and he didn't really do anything. But I look at McKinnon as a guy that maybe he's healthier now. Maybe he's going to be 100%. And if he is, he's one of the better athletes at the position. He is very versatile and he's explosive. So I'd take a chance on Jerick McKinnon as a veteran, do-it-all type of running back. Wayne Gallman was actually really good replacing Saquon when called upon with a bad offensive line. I thought he performed well. He had like 4.6 yards per carry, which is pretty solid. I think he's a solid number 2. Buyer beware, Marlon Mack, because he's coming off of an Achilles, and that's basically the only reason, along with he doesn't catch the ball. And then secondly, Leonard Fournette, because he played behind, I think, an awesome offensive line. He had Tom Brady. He had a great receiving game. And he had a quarterback that understood, how to get him the ball as a receiver, even though he dropped a lot of passes. They kept the faith. I think Fournette's best place is to go back to Tampa Bay. If he goes elsewhere, unless it's with an elite quarterback or an elite offense, I'd be a little worried. I mean, the guy got cut by Jacksonville for a reason. So even though he put together a great playoffs, I wouldn't fully 100% buy into that. So those are my running back free agent rankings and preview. Now, the wide receiver position. Wide receiver, top 10. Wide receiver, undervalued. Wide receiver, buyer beware. So at the wide receiver position this year, we have a lot of guys that could be considered number one caliber, like 3 of them, maybe 4 of them. And we have a deep list of 20 to 25 guys that I'd consider role players at the very least. Maybe number 2s, maybe number 3s, maybe number 4s. But guys that will be on NFL rosters this time in August and will be playing a role for their team that they sign with. So the wide receiver position is probably the most loaded on offense this year, and one of the more generally loaded positions in the league. The interesting thing about wide receiver is that it's been like 3 or 4 years in a row with excellent wide receiver classes, and this year's no exception. There's another great draft class coming up for wide receivers. Last year we saw another great one, and that could mean that a lot of teams that are looking for a number 2 or a number 3 might just take their chances in the draft instead of signing a veteran number 2 or number 3. That's why some of those guys will be undervalued. But I think the guys that are number 1 wide receivers are going to be paid, and they should be paid because people now realize maybe, just maybe, that they actually matter. So let's look at the wide receiver top 10. So my wide receiver top 10, this considers everything, right? Age, fit, versatility, talent, all of it. Number 1, Chris Godwin. Reason Chris Godwin's number 1, although I think Allen Robinson is a better player than Chris Godwin, like right now. I think Chris Godwin, he's younger. He's actually only 24, guys. 24. He's so young, and he's an excellent player. He is an excellent teammate. Everybody speaks glowingly about Chris Godwin as a player and as a person. And then you have the versatility aspect of he can play in the slot, he can play outside. He's played with multiple quarterbacks. He's succeeded with both. And he's a guy that's in a system that doesn't do a lot of favors for wide receivers. It's really like line up and just run your route and get open. And if he went to a system that actually helped him get open, he would be like a 100 catch guy for the next 5 years. So Chris Godwin is a really good player. Allen Robinson, I think, is going to go more to a team that wants to win like right now or within the next 2 to 3 years, because he's 27 and he's kind of an old 27. He's had some injuries, but he's a really good player. I'd consider him a borderline, if not a top 10 wide receiver. And he's good basically everywhere. He doesn't have the burning speed, but he's one of the better route runners in the league. And he'd fit with the guy that accurate passer. He'd be a very, very good like number 2, but I feel like he'd be still a good number 1 on like 20 teams. So Allen Robinson, just an awesome player and has never had a good quarterback. So I'd like to see him go somewhere with a good quarterback. Number 3, Kenny Golladay. He could follow Matthew Stafford. He could stay in Detroit. He could go elsewhere. But Kenny Golladay is a different type of guy. He's more like a prime version of Alshon Jeffrey. He's like a go up and get it type of receiver. And he doesn't get open. He's like never open, but he's always open. That's Kenny Golladay. He's an excellent red zone threat. He's excellent down the field, actually, for a guy that's not very fast. And he's a huge frame. So quarterbacks that like big framed receivers with long arms will like Kenny Golladay. Will Fuller is a burner and I think is like maybe an like top 30 receiver. He's not quite a top 15, top 20, but he's like a top 30 receiver. He did have the whole roids thing last year, so you got to take that into account. That might actually hurt his stock to some teams. But I think Will Fuller's a number 1 wide receiver, lower end, really good number 2. He's kind of one-dimensional, but the one dimension he's good at, he's amazing at. So that's always a plus. And then you go to number 5, who's Juju Smith-Schuster. Juju Smith-Schuster is, I'm not a huge fan of, honestly. Like, you guys know, if you know me, I don't like his personality. I don't like how he makes everything about himself. But as a football player, he's still young. And he, I think, might be able to improve on another team. And this is why. I think Pittsburgh's scheme has been very vanilla over the last 2 years. And I think if he goes to a different team as a slot number 2 receiver, he would be a high-end number 2 receiver. But if you're paying for him as a number 1 wide receiver, you're going to have issues because he's not a number 1 receiver. He doesn't have the speed. He doesn't have the ability to be number 1. But as a number 2, he'd be a great investment, in my opinion. Number 6, Antonio Brown. The only reason Antonio Brown's 6 and not like 4 is because he's a little older and he's Antonio Brown. He's going to only play for one team and one team only. That's the Bucs. He's not even a free agent, basically. Number 7, Corey Davis. Corey Davis is, I think, a really solid number 2. I do not see him as a number 1 because he's going to be very inconsistent. But when he's playing well, he can play very well and actually take over a game. He used to be, a high overall pick in the draft. A lot of teams are going to value that. Some team that maybe had him rated very highly that think they could maybe improve him a little here and there, maybe takes a chance on him with a big contract. And I think that's where you could get in trouble is he's still kind of young. And if you're trying to pay him to be like the next top 20 guy in this league, I don't think he can quite get there. But I do think he's a top 40 guy at the very least, and he can contribute in a good offense for him. Curtis Samuel is like the wild card of the group. I think he has very high ceiling. He has great potential. He has great athleticism, great speed, all of it. But he's still, young, kind of raw. He's a great athlete, but he's not a pure wide receiver yet. And if you're going to pay him as a number 1 or high-end number 2, you're going to be in trouble. But if you get him as a number 3 with upside, he could be a very good value. Number 9, Marvin Jones. Marvin Jones, I think, might be hitting the lower end of his career. That's what I'm concerned about. But he had a really good year last year, and he's a solid number 2 wide receiver. Number 10, Nelson Aguilar had his best year ever with the Raiders. Could be back with the Raiders next year. Wouldn't be surprised. He's actually found a role as a deep threat, and that's interesting. He had a past of playing in the slot, and you have to find the right spot for Nelson Aguilar, and he can be a very productive player, but he's not a number 1. He is like a good number 3, like a okay number 2 wide receiver, in my opinion. So those are the wide receivers, guys. Let's take a look at the undervalued and the buyer beware. So the undervalued, you'll see some guys that aren't in the top 10. T.Y. Hilton, I think is undervalued because I think late last year, he was actually coming on and playing very well. And I think if he could do that again with the quarterback that he has some chemistry with, as a number 2 wide receiver, I think T.Y. Hilton can be very productive. The problem with T.Y. was he was playing as a number 1, and I don't think he is that anymore. Indianapolis, he struggled last year, but I think if you sign him as a number 2, he'll be good. Rashad Perryman, I think has very high ceiling still. He's shown it the last 2 years. He was hurt this past year, but I think in a better offense with a better quarterback, he has all the tools to be a really good downfield target and an explosive player. Keelan Cole is a guy that I've always liked. I think he has good quickness, speed, route running. He could play a little bit of everywhere. I think he's just an underrated receiver. I'd love him as a number 3 receiver, and I think in a better situation, he'd be very productive. Buyer beware, AJ Green. He's just old. He's slow. I don't see him getting better. I only see him regressing, and just overall, his efficiency as a player last year was gross. So I love AJ Green, but I think his days are behind him. Juju, I talked about it a little bit, but I would not pay him as a number 1. Pay him as a high-end number 2, and I'll be happy. But if you're expecting Juju to be the star of the show, He's going to make himself the star of the show. He's going to dance on TikTok, and you're going to get yourself in trouble, and you are probably going to have a head case on your hands. So there are some downsides to Juju Smith-Schuster as well. So those are the wide receivers, guys. Wide receiver really wanted to discuss because that's an awesome position this year in free agency. Tight end, we're going to be a little bit quicker with. The tight end position this year, we have 3 or 4 really awesome starting caliber, top 10 even caliber tight ends. The rest of the list isn't so exciting. We have some young players that might have some potential, some veterans that are going to be really reliable. And Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith are the headliners that I think could be on the move to go elsewhere that I think might be able to actually break out on their second team. So let's take a look at the top 10 tight ends. Hunter Henry. Hunter Henry is the best tight end here. I think Hunter Henry could be a Pro Bowl level tight end, like a all-pro even. In an offense that features him as the number 2 target, I think he's going to be awesome with a good quarterback. I think he hasn't really been utilized correctly in LA or in San Diego, depending on how you look at it. I just feel like in a different place that knows how to utilize tight ends, Henry's always had the talent. He's just been hurt a little bit here and there, but I think he's coming into his own as like a really good player. Jonnu Smith is one of my favorite tight ends in the league. As you guys know, I think physically he's one of the best in the league. He's continuing to get better and is not utilized enough. I think if he was utilized more, he would be way more known, probably way more productive. Jonnu Smith could be the guy that if he gets an opportunity to be someone that's targeted a lot, could just go off like 1,000 yards. I could certainly see that in a new destination, but I don't think that's really going to happen for him in Tennessee. Gronk's only going to Tampa, so he doesn't really count. Jared Cook, maybe he ends up back in New Orleans, but he sounds like a guy that's going to be moving on because of New Orleans' cap situation. He'll go to a team that's in contention that needs a tight end. That's probably where he's going to go. I think Jared Cook's still a pretty good player. Gerald Everett is a guy that I have no idea if he's good or not, honestly, but he's young. He's shown some flashes of promise, and that's enough for some teams. Dan Arnold, I think, is underrated. I think when I watch him, he's a pretty good player. He's a good route runner, good receiver overall, and I think he could find a home as a low-end tight end 1. Jordan Reed, I think, still got some years left in him as a good number 2 tight end. Can fill in as a number 1 if need be. Vance McDonald, solid blocking tight end as well as can catch the football. He had a season like a couple years ago with the Steelers where he was like 60 plus catches. You know, he was really good for them. And I'm surprised that they moved off of him so significantly, you know, the last couple of years or the last year at the very least when they moved to Eric Ebron more exclusively. But I think he'd be a good number 2 tight end. Tyler Eifert, you just got to be concerned because he's only really a receiver and he's not as athletic as he used to be. Trey Burton is athletic, but he's not a blocker. He's very one-dimensional. He's a number 2, number 3 tight end in this league, in my opinion. Now taking a look at the undervalued and the buyer beware tight ends, Jonnu Smith, I think, is undervalued because, as I said, I think he could be elite if you give him the opportunity and the touches. Dan Arnold's undervalued because I look at him as a tight end 1. I think a lot of people don't really know who he is. Anthony Firkser, I think, is underrated. I think he could play fullback, tight end, block, catch, do all that stuff, and he always seems to get open. I don't know what it is. He doesn't feel like a good tight end, but he just is open, man. Buyer beware, Gerald Everett, because I don't know how good he is. Tyler Eifert, because I think he could get injured at any time, as he has multiple times in the past. And he doesn't block. So, like, he's a one-dimensional, not athletic tight end who doesn't block. Like, I don't want that guy. That's just my opinion. Those are the tight ends. Let me know what you think about those tight ends. Some interesting ones there. Moving to the offensive line, the tackle position. The tackle position is always one that teams are looking to upgrade, specifically with veterans. Always highly priced, always sought out for, always being paid a lot of money. So let's take a look at the top 10 tackles this year in free agency. So starting off with by far the best, Trent Williams, who Trent Williams is maybe the best tackle in the NFL, period. Period. He just came back to football last year and dominated. He might end up back in San Francisco because he likes it there. He performed well there. But anyone that gets him, he's going to be an all-pro caliber tackle. That's how good he is. Taylor Moton is a really underrated player. I think he's a really good right tackle. He's good in pass protection, solid in the run game. He's going to be a high-end starter. You have Darrell Williams, who can play a little bit of tackle, a little bit of guard. I prefer him at right tackle, where he was a former second-team All-Pro of Carolina and a very good player this year for Buffalo. Darrell Williams would be like Taylor Moton, like a solid, not even just solid, he would be good starting right tackle. Villanueva, his years are probably behind him. He probably has 1 year left at the very most. I don't even know if he's going to retire or not. At least I haven't heard anything now, but he could be a guy that starts for 1 year. Maybe he's like a bridge tackle, or he goes to a contending team that needs protection. Russell Okung. Russell Okung's kind of the same thing as Villanueva, although I think Villanueva is significantly better. Russell Okung, I would be a little bit worried about because he just feels like a guy that hasn't played that well recently, but has a big name that everybody kind of knows. So that really speaks to maybe overpaid. Number 6, Banner. Banner is underrated. Didn't get the chance to play this year much, but I think he'll end up in Pittsburgh, and he'll probably start for Pittsburgh. And I think he'll play pretty well in Pittsburgh. So that tells you what I think of him. Number 7, Illuminor, started mostly at tackle for New England this year as their right tackle, with Marcus Cannon being out for the year with the COVID situation. He can play a little guard, a little tackle, but he actually really impressed me. Very solid player, versatility, and doesn't make a lot of mistakes. He's like a starting caliber right tackle or guard. Brunskill, I think his home is as a tackle. He's played guard, center, and tackle, so it really depends where you want him, but I value those type of offensive linemen because he can start at any spot and be pretty good at any spot, but I think he's best at tackle because when he filled in at tackle last year, he was actually a really, really good player for San Francisco. You have Beachum, who is very experienced as a tackle. He's a little bit older, but in a pinch, he can start for you. Basically, if you need him, maybe you sign him as your swing tackle, and he could be that guy on a good team. DeMar Dotson is similar. A guy that played in Tampa for a lot of years, was actually like a Pro Bowl caliber tackle for a couple of years there. Last year played decent. He's older. He's like his mid-30s. But if you need a starter on a team or a swing tackle, a guy that can play and start in a pinch, he's that same guy as Beachum. So those final 2 guys are like veterans that you could sign off the street. Illuminor and Brunskill are like these hybrid, versatile tackles that can play like everywhere. Banner is like a solid starter. Okung is like, can start, but is he more name recognition? Darrell Williams and Taylor Moton are like really good, like 3 or 4 year starters. Trent Williams is the best player by a mile, and he's an all-pro. So those are the tackles. Really interesting position. The guard position, a little bit less interesting. There are a couple big names. Oh, I actually forgot. Let's take a look at the undervalued and the buyer beware. My bad. So let's take a look at that for the tackle position. The undervalued, Cam Robinson. I have Cam Robinson here. He's not in my top 10, but I have him here because, yes, he hasn't played very well as a Jag, but I think a lot of that has to do because he's a Jag. The Jags just aren't good. I think Cam Robinson is like one of those reclamation projects at tackle where if he goes to a better system, a better fit, he could actually like regain his form as a prospect and like be like a starting pretty good player. So that's why I have him as undervalued, because I think he was a promising prospect who went to a bad team and was never really able to get it going. Denzel Good is another guy that's a lot like Illuminor or Brunskill, can play guard or tackle, can start probably in the league if need be, but he's more of a swing guy. I have Brunskill here because I think he's undervalued because a lot of people will look at his production as a guard and say, oh, he's not that good. But as a tackle, he's actually a much better player. Buyer beware Russell Okung because of his age, because of his name value, because basically he's one of those few tackles that everybody kind of knows, but he's not really as good as he used to be. And Jason Peters, because yes, he's a Hall of Famer, one of the best tackles I've ever seen, but he's old as dirt. He's almost 40. And I don't think he's going to play anywhere but Philadelphia, really, unless one of these contenders call. And I don't think he's really that good anymore, guys. So that's why I have him as a buyer beware. Now let's get to the guard position. Guard position, we have a couple big-time players and then a lot of maybe starters, maybe high-end backup guys. That's the way I look at the guard position this year in free agency. Let's take a look at my top 10 guards. So let's start off with Brandon Scherf, who is an all-pro this year. Has been an all-pro, Pro Bowl level guard for the last 3, 4, 5 years for Washington, but not a lot of people know who he is because he plays for Washington. But very good player, will go for a lot of money, and he is worth it. He is very good as a run blocker specifically, but also very solid as a pass blocker. Joe Thuney is a better pass blocker than run blocker, but he is an excellent player. Joe Thuney is versatile as well. He is tough as nails. He's experienced. He's rarely missed any games. I think they're about the same age. Scherf just played better recently on a worse line, so I give him the edge. But Joe Thuney is just as good, if not better sometimes. And those two guys are clearly the best out of anybody on this list. And both will go for a significant amount of money because both are very good. Matt Filer, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. But he's a guy from Pittsburgh who played tackle, played guard, can kind of play both spots. I like that versatility. He's been pretty good at both spots and was pretty good this year. He's more of a pass blocker, which I do value more than run blocking. So that's why he's also a little bit higher on this list. But yeah, he's good. He's solid starter in this league. Lane Taylor, kind of the same thing. Didn't really play this year, was hurt, but solid starter in the league. And has been good with Green Bay when called upon. J.R. Sweezy is actually, I think, underrated. I think he's always been kind of underrated. He's not an analytical darling or anything, but I really like him because he's powerful, he's explosive, he's strong. He can really give you an edge. I think he brings that toughness and that physicality. He kind of like a... how would I explain this? He's like a road grader. He's downhill, beat you up, run you over kind of guard. He's not technically the most sound, but in a situation where he could thrive, he's really good. Feliciano is more of a pass blocker. He's more of a finesse guy than a Sweezy. He was okay for Buffalo. He's a starting caliber player, but not an excellent starter. DJ Fluker played tackle this year, but we know him as a guard. He could play both, though. Speaks to his versatility. He's a big boy. He's closer to a Sweezy, and he's a downhill run blocker. Any situation where he can be that, he's good. Easton is okay. He's got solid versatility. I'm a little concerned because, New Orleans cut him, and he was the third guard on that team, and he didn't play a lot, and there's not really a lot to go off of. But he's a solid player when he's filled in and been pretty good. More of, I would say, a pass blocker than anything. Mike Iupati has been one of the, veteran guards of this league for 10 plus years, but still can play fairly well and still can start, but I don't think he's a starter that I'd want. Ibushi is underrated, I would say. Not a lot of people know who he is. He's from Detroit. Didn't play a lot of snaps, but played enough to see that he's pretty good, and I think deserves a starting caliber contract, and I think is a starting caliber guard. But he would probably be higher on the list if he was a little bit more proven, but that's why I have him at number 10. So those are my rankings. Let's look at the undervalued and the buyer beware. So Ibushi, I put here because I think he's a guy that we don't have a lot of tape of him, but when he's played well. John Miller is a guy from Carolina that was pretty solid starter. I don't know if he's much better than that, but he's young, so I think he's undervalued. Alex Redmond from Cincinnati played fairly graded well from PFF, around 40 something. And considering it's the Cincinnati offensive line, which sucks, and he played pretty well there, that's not bad. You could do worse than that. I think he's like maybe a third guard on a lot of teams, but I think he could be better on a better team and a better offensive line. So that's why I have him as undervalued. Buyer beware Mike Iupati, who I just think he's old, and I saw some bad moments from him this year, so I wouldn't really be willing to invest unless I was Seattle for another year. Andrew Wiley, who got his absolute butt kicked by everybody on Tampa Bay, and I just think he kind of sucks. I just gonna be Patrick Mahomes like running away from everybody made him look better than he is, in my opinion. So that is the guard position, guys. The center position. So centers, we have actually 3 really good starting caliber centers, and then we have a few pretty good players as well. And about like 5 to 7 starters. So that's not bad. If you're a team looking for a starter, definitely worth investing at center. So let's take a look at the center top 10. Corey Linsley, who you could argue is the best center in football. I think this year he was, in fact, and probably ends up back in Green Bay. But he is interesting. I think he might be overpaid because I don't know if centers are necessarily worth like that much, like as much money as a tackle or even a guard. But hey, he's really good, so maybe he is. I don't know. It depends how you feel about centers. David Andrews, who I love this guy. I mean, David Andrews is whoever signs him. If it's New England, which probably will be, but if it's not New England, he's just a phenomenal player to have. He's a great leader. He is extremely intelligent, good in both areas of the game, run game, pass game. Just he's a top 5 center when he's at his peak. He wasn't as good this year, but I think he has plenty of years ahead of him where he'll be a very good player. Alex Mack is a Hall of Fame center, but he's old and he's regressed, and I think could go to a contender. Maybe he stays with Atlanta for another year or 2, but it's probably only another year or 2 for Alex Mack. Austin Reeder, I think, is underrated for Kansas City. Good pass blocker, which I value, and I think could be a decent starter for a lot of teams. Ted Karras is like a worse version of David Andrews. Probably more of a hard-nosed, tougher kind of guy. He's more of a grinder. He's not the most talented, but like he gives you that edge and that just physical nature to the center position, which isn't a bad thing. Pocic is a solid, same kind of thing as Ted Karras. He's not like one of the more talented, gifted centers, but he's like edgy and physical, and teams that run the ball a lot, probably in power schemes, will be good with him. Austin Blythe is more of a zone blocker. He's been good in LA, but I am concerned that he might not be as good elsewhere. That's why he ranks a little bit lower. Ben Garland, same kind of thing. Now, Ben Garland played for San Francisco, and Ben Garland played center, played guard, and he's been good when he's played, but he's been hurt recently. He didn't play this year as much, and he's in an offense just like Blythe, where both of these guys are in zone schemes where I feel like it's easier to play in. I think it's easier, more conducive to offensive line, and the coaches kind of protect them more. So that's why I have them a little bit lower. I'm just not as certain about them overall as the guys that are ahead of them, even though, they might be graded higher, but that's not the only thing that I really look at when I'm looking at offensive linemen. And then you have a couple more players that are really interesting. Shatley, Skura, I think kind of sucked, considering he's in a really good spot for Baltimore. If a team just signs him because he's from Baltimore, I hope not, but I don't know. I think Baltimore needs an upgrade at that spot. And then Shatley as well. Those are my final of the 10 centers. But I really look at like 8 starting caliber guys, and then the rest are like high-end backups kind of thing. That's the way I look at it. So my undervalued and my buyer beware centers. So David Andrews, I think he's undervalued because I think he's coming off a season where he didn't play quite as well as he can. Like, he was good, don't get me wrong, but he wasn't like the best he can be. That's why I think he's undervalued, because he's being paid at a time that's not coming off of his peak of play. Ben Garland could be undervalued because of his versatility, because of his success when he has played, but there are those question marks. Austin Reeder, I think, is undervalued because I think people are going to look at him as a plug-and-play center, but I think actually if he ends up going elsewhere, people will be impressed with how good he is. Buyer beware, I'd say Alex Mack, just because he's old and he could be regressing, and you never want to pay a lot of money to a big-name center who is regressing. Austin Blythe, just because he's in a Sean McVay offensive line, and those guys aren't as good, I think, as the system makes them look. But that's just my opinion. You can disagree if you like. So those are my free agent centers. Now we're moving to the defensive side of the football. I told you guys this would be a long, in-depth video, so I hope you're enjoying it. If you are, guys, make sure you do Gronk spike that like button. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more Bottom Line View. And if you're wondering about the comments and the questions, I will get to those at the end of the video if you have any questions for me at the end. But I just wanted to kind of do this full all the way through to give you like all the analysis possible. For anyone that's watching this back, it's just easier to watch. So let's move into the defensive side of the football, shall we? So the interior defensive linemen, there are a load of good defensive linemen in the NFL, and it's no exception when it comes to the free agents, right? There are a good top 10, and then past that, there's a good top 20. You know, there's a good top 30. There's 30 players that can play in the free agency. So if you're looking for an interior defensive lineman, there should be at least a role player for your team to sign out there that might fit their scheme. So interior defensive lineman. Let's start off with Leonard Williams. And you may notice that I have J.J. Watt as an interior defensive lineman. And that is because J.J. Watt, I think, will be moving inside to the next team he plays. Leonard Williams was unbelievable this year. People don't realize how good he was. He had, I think, he led the NFL in quarterback hits, but I might be wrong about that. He also had double-digit sacks. Of course, people will make fun of me because I voted him to the Pro Bowl, but I did because I think he's awesome. And he's the best player on the Giants defense, I would argue, and it was the only real good pass rusher there. So he did it basically on his own. So if he were to sign elsewhere with another good edge rusher, he would be just as good, if not better. And if he goes back to the Giants and they sign an edge rusher with him, then you're talking about a really good pass rush. But he's young still. He's only like 26, I think. Then you have J.J. Watt, who I still think can play. He could play interior. He could play edge, but I think he's going to play more interior for the next team he plays. Really good pass rusher when he plays inside. Actually, this is something that's interesting that PFF brought up, that he's actually a lot more productive as an interior pass rusher than as an edge pass rusher because he doesn't have the speed he used to have. He doesn't have the quickness he used to have. But that quickness and speed that might not be good on the edge is actually a lot better on the inside. So keep that in mind when the next team signs him. Think about where he might play, and that will allow you to analyze how good he might be. But I think Watt can still be an elite player, and I think he'll be a good investment for the next 2 years, maybe next 3 years. But he actually played like the most snaps he's played this year than a long time. And I think that wore on him a little, but I expect those snaps to go down. But it's good to see that he's actually kind of healthy now. Shelby Harris is a really awesome player who's better pass rusher, I think, than run defender, despite his huge size. The guy's huge, but he is a good player and doesn't play a lot of snaps. He plays less snaps than a lot of top-tier defensive linemen, which I kind of downgrade him for. But he is a really, really good player when he gets in there, productive pass rusher, and probably worth the investment more so than a strict run defender like Dalvin Tomlinson, who's more of a run defender as opposed to a pass rusher. That's why I value Shelby Harris over him. Both are similar age. Both are kind of young. Both are like in their prime. So I think Tomlinson is more of like a number 2, number 3, like good defensive lineman. Well, I feel like Shelby Harris is like a really good number 2 and like a probable number 1 interior pass rusher for a lot of teams. So that's the way I look at those two. They're probably close. But Sue, I think, is better than Tomlinson. But I think Sue might be better than Harris. But Sue is old, and I think he's always been a weird free agent. Like, he's always been a guy that he's kind of been like a mercenary for hire. Like, whoever wants to sign him for a 1 year, like $7-8 million contract will get his services. I think of Sue like I think of like Deadshot from, Batman, I guess. Like, that's the way I think of Ndamukong Suh. So whenever you think of Sue, think of a mercenary, all right? But he's still an amazing player. The incredible thing about Ndamukong Suh is he's a great run defender. He's also a very good pass rusher. He had the most sacks he's had in like 3 or 4 years. And he played more snaps than any other interior defensive lineman this year because Vita Vea was hurt. So he can still play, guys. He's actually very, very good. So that's Sue. Then you have number 6, who I have Poona Ford. Poona Ford had a really good year this year for Seattle, but this is really his only good year, so it's a little concerning, but he's young. He's coming into his own. Good all-around player. Big body. I think can play in a lot of different systems. But I think Seattle will probably re-sign him. Sheldon Rankins, number 7, didn't have his best year this year. That might be a trend moving forward. He might be regressing, is what I'm trying to say. But he could also at the same time get better and get back to himself if he gains better health, but he's a better run defender than a pass rusher, so I wouldn't be willing to spend too much money on Sheldon Rankins, although he's a solid player. Dietrich Wise is underrated. Dietrich Wise is a Patriot that has been one of their better, probably their best pure interior rusher, and I don't think is in a... Honestly, I think the system he's in New England is like a bad fit for him. I think if Dietrich Wise were in a system where he played more of a pass rush role as an interior lineman and like was just like go after the quarterback, I think he would be a guy that could have 7 to 8 sacks a year. But I think because he plays in New England where they don't ask you to pass rush as much, he doesn't really put those numbers up, so people don't really know who he is. Still creates pressure and still, when he's in there is productive. But for New England, he's more of a role player, and I think with other teams, he'd be more of a starting caliber, like, good player. Then you have Roy Robertson Harris, who I think is super underrated all around. Really awesome run stuffer. Huge dude. He is very unique in terms of his profile, his size overall, and I think can dominate certain matchups and certain games. And I don't think gets enough credit because, Akeem Hicks, Eddie Goldman, all these guys in Chicago didn't get to play and start the whole year this year, but he could really go somewhere else and be like a really good player. Maybe similarly to the way that Akeem Hicks went to Chicago and became a really good player. I could see that with Robertson Harris. I could definitely see that. And then number 10, Lawrence Guy. I just think Lawrence Guy is a very reliable veteran, smart player, tough, good run defender, not a great pass rusher, but solid starter. So there's a lot of the Lawrence Guy type of dudes. Let's take a look at the defensive line players that I feel are undervalued and probably buyer beware. So Dietrich Wise is my probably number 1 undervalued, just because I see Dietrich Wise as, again, new system, better Dietrich Wise. F.A. Obada is a guy from Carolina who has a really nice story, a nice background, and I think is a good productive pass rusher. Played a lot on 3-man lines with Carolina and put up some decent sack numbers, some decent pass rush productivity. I think he's a kind of, nobody really knows who he is, but I think he's a good role player. Morgan Fox is a good role player as well. Played beside Aaron Donald. And when he played, played pretty well. Even in moments, when Aaron Donald there in Seattle, Morgan Fox was awesome. So good all around, but he's more of like a number 2, like low end number 2, like high end number 3, like rotation rusher. Buyer beware, JJ Watt, just because of his injury history and because of his name. Don't pay JJ Watt for his past, pay JJ Watt for his future. Mike Daniels, same thing. Mike Daniels hasn't been good the last 2 years. And I don't know if he'll ever be good again, to be honest. And the thing with Mike Daniels is he's old, and it just feels like he's kind of like semi-retired. I don't want to be like mean or anything, but like it feels like the guy, I see him on NFL Network all the time. Like he just feels like a guy that he's not still in his prime. He feels like he knows the door is closing on him. So that's Mike Daniels. And that is the defensive line position. Now let's move to the big edge rushers that everybody wants to talk about. That's the big position that everyone loves to talk about on defense. The pass rushers, the sacks, the strip fumbles, the big plays, the big difference makers on defense, right? There are a lot. And when I say a lot of them, this might be the best position in the NFL, period. This position is loaded, okay? There are 10 guys here who are like borderline number one pass rushers, and there are like 20 other guys that are going to play this year for a team as number twos, number threes, or just overall, rotation guys. And the edge market is one that I always look at for the veterans and for the guys that could be switching systems, that could maybe burst onto the scene that we saw this year with some of the guys that are heading into free agency. Like Reddick and Floyd, for example, even to some degree Akora, which we'll talk about. These guys are all top 10. Let's take a look. So my top 10 free agent edge rushers. Now, again, edge rush is a very hard position to analyze. It's also a very hard position to rank because there are so many different edge rusher types, and there are so many likes and dislikes that you could possibly have at the position. And there's so many different schemes, right? That makes it very hard to analyze. Like a Hassan Reddick can't play like a, let's say, Jadeveon Clowney. Like they're totally different players. Shaq Barrett is not like Hassan Reddick, or I guess that's kind of a similar one. You know what I'm trying to say though. Bud Dupree is a different player. He's more of a stand-up guy, and Carl Lawson is more of a hand-in-the-dirt guy. So that's just the way you look at edge rush. So number one, Shaq Barrett, by far the best edge rusher. It's not even particularly close. I think Shaq Barrett is the fourth or fifth best edge rusher in the NFL. He was the best in the playoffs and arguably, should have been the Super Bowl MVP. He is a difference maker, a huge difference maker. And the thing with Shaq is he doesn't really have a flaw either. He's one of those few edge rushers that can rush the passer, can drop into coverage, and can also defend the run. And I think he'll remain in Tampa, but if another team tries to give him a lot of money, he might be enticed to go there. Carl Lawson is a guy that I've liked a lot for a long time. He's young still. He's entering his prime, and he just had his best season of his career. He put up a lot of pressures, a lot of disruption, and it goes unnoticed because he plays in Cincinnati, but he is really athletically gifted, quick, strong, all of it, and I think could have a big year wherever he goes. I think, if he goes, he is a number one pass rusher to me. He is risky a little because he's coming off a huge year, but I think he's less risky than some of these other guys, right? I think Bud Dupree is risky, even though he's been more productive than like Hendrickson or even Lawson. He's risky because injury, first off, and secondly, he's on a loaded defense with a loaded defensive line. So that makes you always wonder. Trey Hendrickson is risky because he just had one amazing year, but it was an amazing year. Like his pass rush productivity was like top 5, pressures top 5, sacks top 5, all of it. So Hendrickson was incredible as a pass rusher, but he's very one-dimensional, and that is something that you have to take into account. But if you want to be one-dimensional, it should be as a pass rusher. It shouldn't be as a run defender. So that's why I have Hendrickson and Ngakoue and even Reddick over a guy like Clowney. Clowney is like a better run defender than a pass rusher, but I don't care about the run. I care about the pass. So I want the guy that can get after the quarterback, and that's Hendrickson, who I think is at number 4 because while some people might question him, I look at what he was supposed to be out of the draft. It just took him a little bit longer to get there. And I think what we saw last year is closer to what he'll actually be in his career than what we saw, 2 years ago. Yannick Ngakoue has been very productive the last 3-4 years. I don't think he's an elite edge player, but he's like a top 20, top 30 good player, causes strip sacks quarterbacks, creates pressure on his own without having to scheme, which I think is the difference between him and Matthew Judon. Number 6, Hassan Reddick. I have my questions about 1 year of amazing productivity, but he is athletic. He's a former first-round pick. He switched positions a little, so that helped him, and I think that helps his... If you put him in the right spot, now maybe teams know where to play him. Maybe he's a value to some teams, potentially. Jadeveon Clowney, okay, this is just me. I need to turn the camera on for this one. Jadeveon Clowney, okay, guys, you got to understand. Jadeveon Clowney lasted so long last offseason because he doesn't practice, he has an injury history, and he's not a great pass rusher. So you're asking to sign a guy that even though, he's been a PFF ranked top 20 the last 6 years in a row. He's been, one of the more well-known, productive players for the last decade almost, right? Last 5 years, Jadeveon Clowney's been an awesome player. But the problem with Clowney is he's better at run defending than pass rushing. He's already been injured 4 times. And he does not practice. His effort is from a lot of sources, just not there. So a lot of teams, because of those reasons, will simply cross him off their board. They're just going to say, Clowney, he can go there. We're not going to get him because he doesn't practice. So if he doesn't want to practice, he's not going to be on our team. Some teams are just like that, right? So you expect, you think a guy like Bill Belichick is going to sign a guy that doesn't practice? I doubt that. So there's just certain guys like that, the name recognition might be better than I think the productivity right now. You look at number 8, Leonard Floyd, who I think is a good player, but same thing with Dante Fowler last year. Maybe he was more productive than he is actually good. I think Floyd's value is in that he can do a little of everything and be good at it, right? He can play edge, he can play linebacker, he can play the run, he can play the pass, he can do all of it a little and do it all well, but I don't think he's elite at any area. Number 9, Matthew Judon. I think Judon is good, Matt Judon, if he's in the right system. If he plays for Baltimore or Miami or a team like that, he'll be good. But if he plays in a team where they're just okay, we got 4-man rush and Judon, you got to get to the quarterback, I don't think he's that type of guy. I think he's more of a scheme guy. That's just my opinion. And then lastly, number 10, I have Romeo Okwara, who's very interesting. Romeo Okwara, this is what I'll say about him. Whenever he has been allowed to be a pass rusher, he's been very good. Now, the problem with Romeo Okwara is that when you play in a system for Matt Patricia, you are not asked to be, just get to the quarterback. Just rush and just sack him. But what we saw with Romeo Okwara was when he was allowed to be let free as a pass rusher, he put up double-digit sacks, right? So his pressures were there. His productivity was there. This wasn't just a pure totals thing. He was very productive, efficient from his pass rush, which is something you need to look for. You don't just look at the totals he got 10 sacks. Well, he had 1,000 rushes. Of course he had 10 sacks. No, he was a little bit of both. He's still young. He's entering his prime. And I think for a team that is, 4-man rush, just let Okwara and these guys get there, he'll be better than being in a team where he has to be, set the edge, be athletic and run around and contain the quarterback. No, just let him get to the quarterback. That's what I think Romeo Okwara is going to benefit from moving forward if he plays in that type of defense. And that's why I put him at number 10. I think there's other players that people would put at 10 or whatever, but I think because of his youth and because of that potential that is there, that is why I have him at number 10. So let's look at my undervalued and my buyer beware players. So Tyus Bowser is a player that I really like. I think actually out of all of the Ravens edge rushers, he was probably down to down the most efficient pure pass rusher of all of them. And I think if he gets more snaps, he would be a very productive player. He's good in a lot of facets of the game, but he's just not gotten a lot of snaps. I look at Aldon Smith and I say, this guy, had a really good start to last year. And maybe I feel like he just played too many snaps. He was out of football for like 2, 3, 4 years or whatever it was, and then was expected to come back and be a team's number one pass rusher. Things don't happen like that, okay? But Aldon Smith, I think, could go to a team and be a very productive number 2 pass rusher. Could be Dallas, actually. And, of course, Romeo Okwara for the reasons I stated. Buyer beware Leonard Floyd, because Leonard Floyd played with Aaron Donald, and we saw the exact same thing happen with Dante Fowler. So just in my opinion, if you're expecting the same productivity out of Leonard Floyd you saw this year, you're probably going to be wrong. And Matt Judon, because of the reasons I stated, I feel like he's more of a product of Don Martindale than a product of Matt Judon. That's just my opinion, and I don't mean to slight Ravens fans or Judon himself, but that's just kind of the way I feel about it. All right, let's move to the linebacker position, which I feel the linebacker position's actually been undervalued as of late. When you look at the Super Bowl and you look at the Super Bowl champs, with those two awesome linebackers, I think a lot of teams are going to look at linebacker this offseason and say, we need those guys. We need the speed. We need the athleticism. We need the coverage ability. We need the playmaking ability of Levante David and Devin White. And I think we might see that with a couple of these free agent linebackers here. So let's take a look at the linebacker free agents, where I think there's 3 really good players, 1 amazing player, 2 really good players, and then a lot of interesting players. I don't know how good they are, but they're interesting. So let's take a look. Number 1, of course, is Levante David, who I fully expect to go back to Tampa Bay. But if he does not, he's interesting because I think he instantly upgrades any defense he goes to from every single way you could. Coverage, run defense, leadership, experience, teammate, all of it. Levante David is arguably the best linebacker in the league. So getting him would be highly useful, especially for a team that lacks coverage or lacks just speed in the middle of the field. But he is getting older, so that is something to consider. Jayon Brown is somebody I've liked for the last 2 years a lot. I think he is highly versatile. He brings good blitzing ability, good coverage ability, good speed. He is a pass game player, and that's what I like. He's good versus the pass. Matt Milano I got a crush on this guy, borderline crush. I mean, Matt Milano is an incredible football player. He does not make mistakes. He has a very high football IQ. He is excellent coverage-wise, running backs or tight ends. He basically does anything that you want. He's not a blitzer, but he's a really solid tackler in open space. He's got good athleticism, and I just think he could play in any scheme as the middle linebacker. So Matt Milano's the guy that I feel I'm really interested to see how much money he's paid. Because, I don't know how teams value Matt Milano, but we'll see, I guess. KJ Wright's really good, but he's old. And he just had a really good year. I was actually surprised by how well KJ Wright played in 2020 because he is older. But he's still a good player. Gets by a lot with his intelligence, which I think allows him to still play at a high level, which you do got a little bit concerned about. Denzel Perryman was really good once he became the full-time linebacker for the Chargers. Really, really stout player, strong, quick, fast, and really good in pursuit, I would say. Number 6, Nicholas Moreau, who had a breakout year for the Raiders. Played more as the number 2 or number 3 linebacker, but he's meant for that role. Decent in coverage, decent in run defense. He's a typical like 4-3 linebacker. Pierre Lewis, I have at number 7 because of his coverage grade. He was very good in coverage this year and is a good athlete. I think could be utilized in a scheme that utilizes him kind of like a Devin White, a blitzer with his speed, and then maybe a little bit of a cover guy, man on man to tight ends and running backs. I could see him being successful in that role. At number 8, BJ Goodson, who had a really surprising year for Cleveland. And I think Cleveland will probably want him back. But he's just an overall good linebacker, still pretty young. Number 9, Devondre Campbell. Devondre Campbell has always intrigued me. I've always wanted to see Devondre Campbell in the New England defense because he reminds me a lot of like Dante Hightower, but he's always been in like an Atlanta-Seattle scheme, which I don't think he has the speed to be in that scheme. So I'd really like to see him move schemes because he is big and pretty fast for his size. Like, I think if he did play in that, use him as a blitzer more and use him as a rusher kind of thing more, he might be better, but I don't know. But he's always been a name that athletically has jumped out at me as a good player. He's had really good seasons. He's had kind of average seasons. I think he's a solid number 2 linebacker. Let's move. Oh, and Eric Wilson. Eric Wilson's a very underrated player. Everyone talks about Anthony Barr. They talk about Eric Kendricks, but Eric Wilson had a really good year this year and could be on his way to getting a bigger contract to becoming the number 1 or number 2 linebacker elsewhere. That's what I would expect at least. So the undervalued and the buyer beware linebackers. Matt Milano is undervalued, I think, because I don't think he's going to be paid like a Levante David, although he's much younger and kind of a similar player. I think Matt Milano would be maybe not as good, obviously, but like I think he would solve a lot of teams' inability to cover the middle of the field. And I think that's very important. It's undervalued. So is Matt Milano. Neville Hewitt played a lot of snaps as the number 1 linebacker for the Jets this year. Really good in run defense, really good in pursuit, solid in coverage. Young still, I think he would be a solid veteran signing. Eric Wilson, I just brought up, very productive playmaker. I think he had 3 picks, a forced fumble, and good athlete, can move, can cover. Malcolm Smith is my buyer beware because he just came off a really good year for him. He hasn't had a good year in a long time, and he just randomly had a good year with Cleveland, and I just don't expect that to happen again. He's like 33, 34 years old. I think he's getting too old. And KJ Wright, just because he's too old. I just think KJ Wright's old, so I probably wouldn't sign KJ Wright unless I was Seattle. All right. So we're moving to the secondary now, guys. The safety position. Safety might be the best. I know I've said that like 3 or 4 times already with like numerous other positions, but safety might be the best position in free agency because we have like actually 5 players that are like all pro caliber safeties, not just like good safeties, not just like starting safeties, but like 5 guys that could be named to the first team all pro in 2021. So safety is loaded, okay? So let's take a look at the safeties. And we also have a lot of depth too, like good caliber number 2, good caliber number 3 safeties. So my top 10 free agent safeties. Justin Simmons is clearly number 1. I think he's a top 3 or 4 safety in the league. He is incredibly versatile. I think he has to cover up a lot of issues that Denver has in the secondary. And I think if he goes elsewhere to a better corner group, he'll be a lot better. He is a rare player that is a deep free safety that also makes an incredible amount of plays versus the run. He is a phenomenal, just overall athlete, leaping ability, coverage ability, size, all of it. He doesn't really have any flaws in his game. He can cover in man, he can cover in zone, he could play the run, he could be strong safety, he could be free safety, he could be nickel corner, he could be linebacker. He could be a lot of different positions, and those are the type of safeties that I really love. Number 2 is Marcus May in a similar way. So the reason I have Marcus May, Justin Simmons, and John Johnson in the top 3 over Marcus Williams and Anthony Harris is because of their versatility. So they're all about the same age, and they're all about the same talent. But Simmons, May, and Johnson are the most versatile of all of them. So, and that means that more teams would be willing to spend on them. Marcus Williams is a true free safety. He's a deep free safety. He's a ball hawk in the middle of the field. But he doesn't impact the game as much as John Johnson, Marcus May, or Justin Simmons. He is more of a, like, don't give up big plays or intercept the ball type of guy. Like, he's not a, let's make a big hit in the box and let's cover this guy in the nickel and let's do this and that. He's a deep free safety. And same as Anthony Harris. The thing with Anthony Harris, which I know PFF is like really high on Anthony Harris. They've graded him very well. He's a good coverage player as a free safety. But we've only seen him in one system, one scheme, and we've never seen him play anything else. And that is a little concerning as opposed to these other guys. Like Marcus May has played like 3 different defenses. He's played free safety, he's played strong safety, and he's been good at both, right? Justin Simmons has played for 3 years as the highest graded safety in the league. He plays free safety, strong safety. He's good in the box. He's good out of the box, you know, right? John Johnson's played in multiple different schemes. He's played strong safety. He's played free safety. Like, these guys are more versatile than 4 and 5. John Johnson was awesome this year and best season of his career, but it does concern me a little that he wasn't as good last year or the year before. He was pretty good in 2018, I think. Number 6, Keanu Neal, who I've always loved. I think he's an excellent strong safety, but he's a little bit of a dying breed. And I think with Keanu Neal, he is like that Seattle scheme, Cam Chancellor type player. He's a big hitter. He, you know, makes plays, forcing fumbles, big hits versus the run, all that sort of stuff. But I think he could be a guy that I'd be very interested if a team signs him as like a hybrid linebacker. I'd be very interested to see if that is how he is signed, or if he moves on from Atlanta, if that's what he does. Or maybe, you know, Seattle, or, you know, maybe a team like running that scheme, right, signs him as their strong safety. Maybe. I could see that too. Number 7, Malik Hooker. Malik Hooker is an absolutely awesome playmaker, free safety type when he plays, but he like never plays. He's a former highly touted first-round pick who I think could be a huge gem if he stays healthy. Jaquiski Tart is number 8. I just think he's a really well-rounded player and plays in that Seattle scheme as well as a strong safety. And similar to Keanu Neal, you know, I would say he's like better at man than Neal is, but he's not as big of a playmaker as Neal. He is just solid. And then number 9, Rayshawn Jenkins. I think super underrated from the Chargers. Had really good statistics this year. He's kind of like, who would you compare him to? He's like a Trey Boston, like a little free safety, a little strong safety, a little bit of everything. Good in coverage. Number 10, I have Deron Harmon. Is just a really awesome number 3 safety. He's a great free safety. He's like, he can do everything Marcus Williams can do, but just not as well. Like, that is what Deron Harmon is. And he has plenty of experience. So, and leadership. So that's what you're getting with him. All right, let's take a look at the undervalued and the buyer beware safeties. So undervalued, Rayshawn Jenkins. I just think he's a really good player that not a lot of people know who he is. He's taken place of Derwin James and played very well. And he can play multiple different positions. Malik Hooker, I think, could be undervalued because I think his upper level of play is elite. Keanu Neal, same thing. Both players have been hurt, but they're still pretty young. And if you get them at a pretty cheap contract, I think they could really go off and play well. Buyer beware John Johnson because this year was his best year. And if he leaves the Rams system, I'm not sure he is quite as good. Anthony Harris, similar thing. So Anthony Harris is actually older than you would think. I think he's like 29. I could be wrong, but I think he's almost 30. And he's only been good for like 2 or 3 years. And then you look at that he's a free safety that has played in one Zimmer scheme. And I don't know how many teams actually run that same defense. And I just don't know how conducive he is to other defenses. So that's why I would say buyer beware. But I could be totally wrong. Again, guys, just my opinion. All right, so that's the safety position. A really good position, obviously loaded in the top 10. There are much better players once you go down the list as well that you could take a look at if your team needs a safety. The cornerback position, always one of my favorites, to see where these guys sign, because I think the corner position is overall one of the more scheme-dependent positions. It's overall one of the more inconsistent positions, which makes it more boom or bust. And I feel like the corner free agency market almost always has a direct impact with who surprises defensively from year to year, right? We've seen defenses that have had guys that you didn't really know were any good at corner, and then all of a sudden they sign like a street free agent for like 1 year for like $2 million, and he just has a rejuvenation. Like a guy that comes to mind is Bashaud Breeland of the Chiefs. Like way better on the Chiefs than he ever was on Washington. Like just way better. And that's the type of player that I think should be valuable. And the thing with corner is more than any other position, I think, on defense, it's all about scheme. It's all about coverage, what you do. Like, are you a man team? Are you a zone team? What do you ask the corner to do on a given play? And that's what fascinates me about corner. So let's take a look at the top 10 guys. So at number 1, I have William Jackson. I think he is the only guy on this list that I would pay as a number 1 cornerback. I think he is a guy that if he leaves Cincinnati and goes to a good defensive staff, he could be absolutely phenomenal. I think he could be a top 10 corner on some systems, on some teams with good coaching and know how to use his ability, because I think he can play in a lot of different systems and I think he can be successful there. And he's still fairly young. Jason Verrett is number 2. Jason Verrett's number 2 because when he plays, he is really good. And I think he can be good in man or zone. He has speed. He has size. He has a wide variety of skills that could make him conducive to a lot of different schemes. That's something that I value a lot with ranking corners. That's not specifically with signing corners, because that's more scheme specific. But in ranking corners, I look at, can you play in every system? Can you play man? Can you play zone? Can you play cover 2? Can you play cover 3? Can you press? Can you play, can you play nickel? Can you play outside? So that's what I look at with corners a lot. And Xavier Rhodes is an example of a guy that he's at number 3. Despite playing better than William Jackson or Jason Verrett this year, he is good in one system, right? He's going to be good with the Colts. He's going to be good in Tampa 2. He's going to be good in cover 3 systems. He's going to be good in, maybe quarters, right? But he's not really a man guy. If he goes back to the Colts, I'd expect him to be a good number 1 corner. But if he goes to, New England, I think he would struggle. That's just my opinion. Number 4, Shaq Griffin, who I think it's the opposite. I think he's a better player than the scheme allows him to be. I think Shaq Griffin would be a better player on a different team. That's my opinion. He's young. He's still got a lot to improve on, but he has a lot of potential, and he's had some pretty good seasons. Last year was probably his best. This year was a step below, but he's still a good number 2 corner. Number 5, Richard Sherman. Sherman regressed a lot this year when he played. And the problem I have with Sherman is the argument I just made. Sherman is one system. If I had Richard Sherman on an island versus Will Fuller, right? I would be asking to literally have suicide. It is suicide to have Richard Sherman play man press coverage versus a speed receiver. You are going to lose. That's just my opinion. At this point in his career, not saying in 2013 Richard Sherman couldn't do that, but it's 2021. And Richard Sherman, I actually think, would be an incredible safety, but I don't know if he wants to make that move. But as a high-end number 2, a veteran-savvy number 2, I think he'd be awesome. And as a number 1 in a system that fits his skill set, I think he could be still pretty good. Then you look at number 6, Ronald Darby had an amazing year this year. He sucked last year, so that's just the position, right? And I think in Washington, again, guys, scheme fit is important. Ronald Darby is 26, I think, so that moved him up in the rankings because I think Ronald Darby has had like 2 or 3 really good years and like 1 or 2 really bad years and nowhere in between, which makes him really hard to rank. But that's where I have him. Number 7, Bashaud Breeland, because I think Bashaud Breeland's actually really underrated. He shut down a lot of guys. I mean, the Chiefs gave up the least amount of yards to the perimeter wide receiver position this year, and a lot of that is because of Bashaud Breeland. And he's also really good in man coverage, which I value. So Breeland's at number 7. Number 8, Patrick Peterson, who's had 3 consecutive seasons in a row. He's not who he used to be, not even close. And I think he could still be a good number 2 for a lot of teams, but he's no longer a number 1. Quentin Dunbar, I think, had a down year this year, but I think could bounce back next year on a different team potentially. Chidobe Awuzie from Dallas is, I think, a little underrated. Still pretty young, 25 or 26, and more of an outside corner, but can play in the nickel as well. And I think he's a solid number 2 corner. And overall, his stats show you that he's been pretty productive when he's been on the field. This year, he got hurt. So let's take a look at my undervalued and my buyer beware guys. So undervalued, you'll see some guys that aren't in the top 10 here. Cameron Sutton from Pittsburgh. He's their number 4 corner, but he played a significant amount of snaps, both inside and on the perimeter. I think he's pretty solid in different schemes. I think he could be pretty good. He's got pretty good size, pretty good length, man ability, zone ability, and I like the versatility with him, and he's still young. Garyon Connolly is somebody that if he goes to a man coverage team, like this would be the classic Kansas City Chiefs cornerback pickup, Garyon Connolly, because in man-to-man, he is much better than he is in zone. So a team that values man coverage could get a value in Garyon Connolly, especially man press coverage. Michael Davis is the exact opposite. So Michael Davis was really good with the Chargers this year. Really productive, and I think in that scheme, he is undervalued. Like, I'd rather sign Michael Davis to 1 year or 2 years, $8 million, and 1 year, $4 million than I'd sign Richard Sherman to 2 years, $20 million. Like, Michael Davis was just as good as Richard Sherman this year, if not better, and played in the same system. And nobody really knows who he is, and he's young. Buyer beware, Richard Sherman and Patrick Peterson, because they're 2 Hall of Fame players, but they're not Hall of Famers anymore. So when you're that, you got to be buyer beware. And that's not saying that I didn't used to love Richard Sherman or Patrick Peterson. I love both players, especially Richard Sherman, but you know, you're old, man. It's free agency. I don't know what to tell you. So those are the corners. And finally, we have a final position here before the chat is the nickel position. So I made a whole new position for nickel corners because I felt it was worthy of it, because there's a lot of nickel corners in free agency this year that exclusively play nickel, like barely play on the outside. They play in the nickel position, which is covering the slot receiver, which I think is probably the most undervalued position by mainstream football people. Like, nickel position is extremely, extremely important, and I think should be valued way higher than it currently is. So let's take a look at the top 10 nickel corners available. Number 1 is Brian Poole of the Jets. He's the Jets' best corner and really good the last 2 years. Really low completion percentage, passer rating allowed, despite playing on a terrible defense. Very good player. Mike Hilton, solid player. You would be a little concerned that he played with a great pass rush, I guess, but I think he's been the most consistent corner on his team for the past 2 years. K'Wan Williams is a totally different player from Poole or Hilton. Poole or Hilton are smaller, quicker corners, and K'Wan Williams is like bigger, and he's more of like he can also play the run type of guy. And he'd be a really good fit for a scheme like San Francisco, like Seattle. He'd be a really good fit there. Now, Hill, and that's not Tyreek or Taysom Hill, guys. That's a different one. Hill is interesting because I think based on how he played this year, he's top 3. But because he was surrounded by such great other talents on the Rams defense, it's hard for me to really know what he is. But I will say this about Hill. He plays on the outside or the inside. So both things, he can do it either or. So that is good. He has versatility, more so than a Hilton or a Poole who are exclusively nickel guys. Desmond King, I think, is a little overvalued because I think he had an all-pro year 3 years ago, but hasn't been as good since. And I think because he's still young, people will pay him as if he was his 2018 form, but he hasn't been that since. And I think he is more of just an okay player than a really, really good player. Number 6 is Darqueze Dennard, who plays outside or inside and is pretty good at both. And everywhere he's been, he played for Atlanta this year, Cincinnati, has been pretty good. Not like great, but like a pretty good nickel starter. Mackenzie Alexander. Is it Mackenzie? I believe it's Mackenzie. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's Mackenzie Alexander, Cincinnati. He is actually pretty impressive when I watched him in some big games this year. Like, the one that stands out to me was what he did to Juju. I mean, he destroyed him. I think Alexander in a man system would be a better player than he currently is. I think he's kind of underrated, actually. Number 8, Chandon Sullivan for Green Bay. Only really 1 year to go off of, but he was all right. Average player, nothing special, but young. So I'd rather go with him than a guy like Nickel Roby-Coleman, who's maybe had higher highs, but he's getting up there in age. And number 10, DJ Hayden, who was amazing last year statistically, but fell off this year. And he's had more kind of disappointing years than great years, but he's shown that he can play in this league at a very high level. So he's one of those wild card type corners that you see every year. So those are the nickel rankings. Now to the undervalued and the potentially buyer beware. K'Wan Williams, Jordan Lewis, Mackenzie Alexander. K'Wan Williams, because he was hurt this year, I think if teams pay him, and get him on a 1 or 2 year contract, like a prove it deal, I think he'd be unbelievable at that price. Jordan Lewis from Dallas. Young still. I think he's 25 or 26, exclusively nickel corner. I think he'd be better in a man scheme. And he just always stands out to me when I watch Dallas. I think he was probably their most consistent corner this year. And I know that's not saying a lot, but I think his youth helps him. I see the upside with him. He's not great right now, but I see upside. Mackenzie Alexander, same thing with him a little, but I just saw some really awesome elite performances from him this year that makes me believe that, maybe with a better defense around him, he could be a really good player in a season, one of these seasons down the road. Buyer beware. Troy Hill, because of what I stated about him with the Rams defense, and Desmond King, obviously, for obvious reasons. So those are the undervalued and the buyer beware. And that is the preview, the in-depth analysis on NFL free agency, every position, top 10. We did it in under 2 hours. Let's go. Big show. Hope you guys enjoyed the show. We're going to get to comments here in just a second. If you haven't already, for whatever reason, and you're slacking, make sure you do Gronk spike that like button. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you find this stuff interesting. If you love free agency as much as me, subscribe to the channel and let me know who you think your team should sign this off season. All right, let's do some comments, guys. Let's do some comments. Where we at? Where we at with these comments? Yo. What's up, T-Bone? What's up, Stan? What's up, Sports Fan? Thanks, guys, for sticking around. Kevin Durkant says, not gonna lie, not bad. Only problem was sorry-ass Justin Simmons as the number 1 safety. Random Dude says, then Gronk number 1. Nikki says, Mitch, do you think OBJ gets traded to the Bucks? Nikki, I hope so. Do I think so? Probably not, but do I hope so? Yes, sir. Now, I will say this. If Chris Godwin leaves, that certainly could be a possibility. Brian says, Mitch, I have a video idea. You should make a video on how to evaluate draft prospects at each position. I'd like to learn how to better do that, and I think others may as well. Thanks in advance. That's a good idea. I might do that. We'll see. That's a good topic, though. I mean, I'm not a draft expert or anything, but I could give you my opinion. Aiden says, I'm a Troy Hill guy, but I hate it if the Rams let him go. Okay. Aiden says he's good. Vance McDonald retired? Okay. All right. No problem. Nick is still holding on to his Cam Newton take. He says, I strongly disagree with Newton at 2. He hasn't been good since 2017. Can't even throw the ball. He got hurt and is 7 years older than Trubisky. I don't know how you can watch Cam Newton and Mitchell Trubisky and say Mitchell Trubisky is better. I'm just going to be honest. I know that Cam wasn't like anything special this year, but one had Allen Robinson and one had N'Keal Harry. So, I mean, I don't know. Sports Fan says, Mitch, who do you think my Eagles should sign? We will be doing predictions and some like team fits down the road here. I make other videos for that. I don't really know exactly right now, but when I make those videos, I'll have a better idea for sure. And I'll make some predictions. Who do you foresee being most overpaid? I can see it being Juju, just off the top of my head, just because I've never bought in as Juju as a number 1. And I think because of his youth and because of his name and because he had that one unreal year, that people will maybe overvalue him. Lock and Loaded says, what's your thoughts on J.J. Watt having interest to join Cleveland? I like it. I mean, I think Cleveland would be significantly better with him. I think it would be a position for him to thrive. Like I said, I think he'd be able to play in the interior. And I think he is probably, even if they don't get Vernon back, he'd probably be an upgrade over Vernon. And I think that would significantly help their defense, a defense that's not very good. Roland says, what is the best free agent player for the Patriots? You mean like available for them or like who they should get? I won't answer that until you give me the specifics there. Isaac says, what free agents are you like 90% confident will return to their teams? Gronk. I'm 107% confident that Gronk will re-sign with Tampa Bay. And Antonio Brown. Everyone else? I don't know. Everyone else, and probably Dak. But everybody else, I think everybody else has at least like 10% that they could leave. Yes, I heard about the Orlando Brown trade rumors. Ultra says, Mitch, are you ready to draft the greatest team ever assembled? Yes. Can't wait. District says, what's up? What's up? Aiden says he's hoping that the Bears franchise tag Allen Robinson. Lock and Loaded says, do you think the Chiefs will go back-to-back? Or they deal with the Super Bowl hangover? The Chiefs went back-to-back this year in terms of going to the Super Bowl, but they lost, so it wouldn't be a back-to-back. I guess it would be a three-peat of appearances, but not of wins. I don't think the Chiefs will make it off the top of my head right now, but maybe they do. I don't know. Lenny says, I don't know enough yet. I don't know who the free agents are signing with. I don't know who's getting traded. A lot could change, but just by averages, I'd probably say no. They probably don't make it. Rollins says, was thinking the cover corner you mentioned. I'm still confused. Lenny says, Mitch, is Belichick really a bottom 5 GM? No. Aiden says, who do you think is going to be an underdog for the NFC? Carolina. Guys, make sure you do Gronk spike that like button if you haven't. Appreciate it. Also, if you're interested in joining the Madden League and you haven't, then check out that link in the description. We have the Discord, and you can hit up Turtle to join our PS4 Fantasy Madden League. Check it out. Especially if you want to lose to me. I'm just saying. Lenny says, why do the Raiders have to torture me? Because, Lenny, you are a tortured soul. I want to see the NFC East be good. I do too. The NFC East being good is better for football. Oh, I thought you were saying Carolina. Wow, that's a bad take, but I guess Nicholas is just having the same take, which I don't know if that's a good thing or not. Sports fan says, who you think the Eagles should draft? I don't know yet, man. I don't know. Sorry to let you down with these answers, but when I do the predictions, I'll let you know. But until then, I don't know. All right. Yes, also DM Bethel on the Discord if you want to sign up for the Xbox League. He's running one. Winter says, do you think the Patriots will keep N'Keal Harry? I hope not. Which free agent receivers do you think they'll likely sign? Hopefully Godwin or any of those good players. Any of the top 8 receivers would be the best receiver on the Patriots. I'm not even joking. Maybe top 10. All right. Rollins says you mentioned an underrated corner who would be best utilized in Gary and Connolly. Yeah, that would be a good fit. I agree. He's still pretty young. He missed last season, I think. All right. I think I'm going to end it here, guys. We're gonna have so much more free agency content coming up. It's going to be wild. Predictions, top 20 at each. Offense and defense. We're going to talk about a team fit for every, free agent fit for every team. Quarterback possibilities. A lot of stuff coming. As well as I announced on the Discord and on Instagram, Brady Hater Part 2. My most successful video I've ever made. The follow-up, the sequel, the long-awaited sequel. It's coming. It's coming. We're thinking this is going to be a sequel. It's going to be on the level of, I don't know, like the greatest sequels of all time. It's going to be Dark Knight level. That's what I'm thinking. It's going to be up there. It's going to be up there. I can't wait to make it, and I can't wait for you guys to see it. All right. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, make sure you do Gronk spike that like button, and of course, don't forget to subscribe. It's Mitch. Thanks for being here live, and if you were not live, thanks for watching. Peace.